So don't forget about this Wednesday. And then I posted a extra credit assignment, okay? It's in the EduCat, like toward where you see all the exam, like when you go to click on an exam, it's in that area. And it's an extra credit. You don't have to do it, but it's not that bad. It is, I've posted these, this is a really short readings. It's this little small book, short chapters. It's about fungi, the hidden life of trees, okay? And it's about fungi and forests. So I want, if you want to do this, you read through those and then you find a paper within the last 8 years published on Google Scholar or something. And just look at, probably the discussion, a little bit of the intro, and see how it relates to a topic that's covered in these readings. You don't have to cover everything. Just pick a topic. What do they talk about in here? And then try to find something that's been published to kind of, does it back it up? Does it refute it? What's going on? Okay. So like a page or less. I don't want anything on and on and on. Just like a couple paragraphs, you're good. Okay. And the assignment Dropbox is right in that top section of EduCat as well. Okay, questions on that? So hopefully it'll be a fun read. Always fun to think about how fungi interact with trees and ecosystems, in my opinion. Okay, so let me know if you do have any questions. And then I updated these two flowers and fruit, the 1 and flower and fruit 2. I updated them over the weekend, I think, because I found some additional things that needed to be said. So where is that? So I was looking for something and stumbled on another issue with bees. Did you hear about this one? So this was published just this month. And a deadly parasite threatens bees in 130 crops they help grow. So this is spreading from Asia into Europe right now. It's not quite here yet, but they're predicting it will be. And it's not the same mite as I talked to you about last time when we were looking at Varroa destructor. That mite, it's different. It's, I don't even know how to say this word, Tropicolaps mites, tropy mites for short. I prefer that. Okay. And so in Europe last year, this is scary. They're looking at tracking it. So this is how it's tracked so far. And it just decimates hives, the bee population. It's terrible. And it's tiny. It's really hard to see. So it's smaller than the Varroa destructor mite, and it's lighter in color, almost transparent sometimes. So it's easy to miss it, but it's having a deadly impact. I mean, it's just tiny. It's worse than Varroa. I don't think we'll ever be prepared fully. They're really worried about almond crops over in Europe. And of course, we grow almonds in California, Central California. So yet another worry to think about. So honeybees need our help. It's not over, even though some people say, things are getting a little bit better with the other issues. Now we have this to worry about. So yes.
Where do these mites?
This one spread from Asia, but exactly what, like, did it have another host and it jumped to honeybees? Has it always been the honeybee host? I don't know. But they did say it came from Asia and is spreading from there. So, and they predict it's going to be over here soon. So that's not a happy Monday thought at all. And then I was talking to you about bats, that's another issue that I wish people would lay off the bats. They're good for many, many reasons, and including pollination. And I couldn't help but put peduncle in there, strong peduncle. So I had a glass of wine when I was doing this. So it's like, put peduncle in there. So, but let me show you this really cute video, if I can manage to show this and not mess it up here. So you've watched a Sir David Attenborough by now, right?
Oh, yeah.
In like I do it in lab too. So maybe you've seen this, but it's always good to see it again. It's only 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. So let's see if I can duplicate. Yeah, I'm gonna have to shift that. And
This is the 7-hour flower.
all right, why won't it? I gotta do my, no, what do I want? I want sound settings. How do we get it to play through this thing? Where's
To the
my,
right of the volume, it's like I don't know,
yeah,
that option.
speakers, go to this?
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem.
Ugh, technology.
It's me.
Now is it gonna work? Let's go back.
Is the 7-hour.
7-hour flower.
They open about 6 o'clock, and each blossom only lasts that night. It opens about 7 hours, and then it dies. But during that time, it provides food for one particular animal. A bat. Here it is. In 7-hour flowers flowering season, Underwood's bat feeds almost exclusively on its nectar. It is the plant's primary pollinator. It might seem that this is a fairly evenly balanced relationship, but not so. The bat likes this nectar because it's sweet, but it's not very nourishing. So the bat must visit hundreds of flowers a night, and it pollinates them as it feeds.
Look at that small patch. That's it.
Life in the forest depends on countless close relationships, but they are increasingly under threat as forests become more fragmented. The solution, of course, is to join these remaining fragments together again.
Okay. So how can you hate a bat after seeing that? Beautiful music, Sir David Attenborough laughing, big, beautiful videography. So very, very important pollinators. And did you catch him saying that they don't produce a lot of nectar to force the bat to keep moving and pollinating and pollinating and pollinating? So that brings me to the idea, I also wanted to show. So I have it in the notes on this slide if you want to watch that again. And then, so the idea of keeping the bat moving, don't give, each flower only gives a little bit of nectar to keep the bat going. And I wanted to point out, where is it now? Oh boy, where did I put it? In with the bee stuff. Okay, So this is one of the updated slides. So some of this you've seen already. But this last bullet point, I wanted to make sure you're clear on. So usually when you look at flowers that are dependent on bees, again, they don't give a ton of nectar per flower. The reward is modest. And again, that's the idea of keep the bee moving, because the plant wants, of course, the pollen to get transferred to the stigma of another flower. And so you want to keep the bee moving amongst all these individuals of the flowers or the plant species. And so it's kind of like the analogy of, you know, you don't want to give a bee a full turkey dinner. You know how you feel after Thanksgiving and you just want to lay on the couch and watch football or whatever? Well, that's not ideal for the plant. It's like, no, keep moving. You know, you got a little taste now, keep moving, because your job is to pollinate my species. And so thinking about the energy needs of the pollinator too, think about that idea. And bees, you know, it's amazing they can fly, but you don't want to give them too much all at once. They do have energy needs, but you don't want to make them too satiated. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's been modified from the original slide set. And then I added in the stuff about this new mite that's causing issues in Europe. And then, okay, so I think now we're getting into orchids. Orchids are a special case here because some of their interactions with their pollinators are incredibly intertwined and specific. And the orchid flower, the evolution of that to get the job done in the sense of from the plant's perspective, they want pollen delivered to the stigma. It's amazing what they can do. So has this been assigned yet has another Sir David Attenborough been assigned yet in lab on, I can't remember what they renamed the video, but it's essentially pollination strategies. Has Duncan talked to you yet about that? Okay, he'll probably ask you to watch that. I think I better get that out to you because don't you have a quiz coming up this Friday, right? We're gonna open it on Friday. Yeah, so let me get you the link or make sure it's in his EduCat page because it's another Sir David Attenborough and he does talk a fair bit about orchids and just pollination mechanisms, but the flower design on this one, for example, is kind of a trap in a way where it routes the pollinator to the inside of this pouch-like formation of the petal. So they're kind of in it, in this like little pouch. And then the only way out is through the area right where the stigma is, so that the pollen they have on them will brush against the stigma as they go to exit. So, I mean, that's an incredibly specific evolutionary strategy in order to attract that particular. So here you can often see that they call it polonium. You don't need to really know that, but basically it's a modification of the pollen sac essentially, where it sticks on the insect. And then as they brush that, as they move past the stigma, once that breaks off, there'll be stigmas, sorry. And then it can brush against that. And so it really does stick quite tightly. The video shows the insect trying to get it off of them, but it's stuck on them pretty well. And so, you know, they even have like an explosion type with the insect bumping. And so it's amazing. You can read through these. Sometimes the pollinia attaches to the mouth part and just kind of clamps on. I mean, it actually has like this clamping function with, especially with butterflies with their long proboscis. So incredibly, so again, just, you know, looking at the proboscis and here the pollen it's on there. Here's another one where you have the polonium Again, you can see it gets attacked quite nicely. It just sticks on there. And then when they go to the next flower, they rub the pollen against the stigma. So it's a very precise mechanism of employing these insects to first get the pollen on them and then design the flower so that they have to move in such a way with the flower that's eventually they'll rub the plinium against the stigma. So very, very tricky. Here's a cute picture. Right on his forehead. That's got to be confusing. So, and then there's some orchids you'll see in the video too. This is the wasp orchid, where it looks like a female wasp, and the male wasps are very strongly attracted. Not only does it look like a female wasp, I mean, even to the look of the fine hairs on the wasp body, but it pumps out a pheromone. The plant actually pumps out a pheromone that smells like a female wasp that wants to mate. It's amazing. And then, of course, you'll see the male wasps strongly attracted. You'll see in the video with Sir David Attenborough, it's like all of a sudden a bunch of male wasps, and they're all trying to get to the female, and it's just kind of a crazed interaction there. But it's creating a situation where as the male wasp is trying to mate, he'll bump into the plinium and get those stuck to him. And it's, I mean, if you look at the wasp, I mean the orchid, that hairs on the orchid petal looks like the female wasp. And so here, the male wasp is trying to mate, and as they do that, they get the stuck on their head. And then they go to the next flower and will rub against the stigma with the pollen.
It's a little dance camp.
Yeah. So in this case, the orchid's really not giving much of a reward, more of a frustration, an exercise in frustration. No real reward. So sometimes plants will do that. They'll trick, so to speak. Yeah, you got pranked. Exactly. Ha ha, you got pranked. So orchids can be amazing that way, where they can kind of trick. Sometimes they won't give a big food reward, but they might give like a smell reward. Like if you come to this orchid and get wet with this pheromone I'm producing, you know, it'll help you, complete your life cycle. So there's things like that too, but orchids are interesting. So here's another one with a real trapdoor mechanism here. So they fill it with fluid into the trap area. It's filled with fluid. Here's the insect floating in that fluid. The insect may fall into the fluid, and then they have to escape through a trap door. And as they do that, they will get contact. Yeah, isn't that? It's just amazing. Yes, that's what it's so ornate. So it's just, and orchids are one of the most successful plants on Earth of the angiosperms. They're hugely successful. We don't see a lot of them around here, but so there is a real bucket orchid. You can see how that would catch the eye, especially of certain flies. They're like, ooh, what's that? And now they got the attached. So really interesting. You'll watch that Sir David Attenborough video, and he talks a lot about these mechanisms.
Are orchids known for like mimicry in general? I know on like Wednesday when you were showing some photos of them too, they even like
Yeah.
yeah.
You look at that and you're like, the way they're designed to our eye, they look certain ways, but it's like, what purpose is that for them?
Yeah.
And that's a really good question. To our eye, it looked like, the naked man orchid and the egret and the monkey. But there's not a naked man running around pollinating. So that didn't work, but.
A tree.
So I don't know. is cases of mimicry in the plant world, but not as much as what you see in the animal world. I think that's a fair thing to say. Probably the best case of mimicry is that vine, that Bucilla
Yeah.
trifoliolata, that shapes its leaves to look like nearby leaves. But orchids, I don't know, I wouldn't put it past them in terms of mimicry. You know, the wasp,
Yeah.
but I don't know if there are, I mean, there's hundreds of different orchids out there. There's probably some mimicry going on besides the wasp idea. So, okay, and then I forgot to include buzz pollination as a strategy that plants use. And when we were talking about bees, so I wanted to include that too. And so this is where you have an acoustic mechanism at play, right? So this is an interesting idea where the plant won't give up its pollen unless the bee buzzes at the right frequency. So it's really creating a very specific, I only want this bee that knows how to buzz at this frequency to get my pollen, because then that bee will go to another individual of my species and complete the job of pollination. And so it really is amazing how specific this can be. So I'll show you another short video here where, you know, they show like a whole field of wildflowers with all kinds of pollinators, you know, buzzing around, and yet it's only this particular bee that can do it. Yes.
Like, do you know how those plants, like how they've evolved to do that?
Well, it's just this coevolutionary idea, you know, over enough interactions over time, they kind of match up, so to speak, through this coevolutionary dynamic back and forth. And yeah, I mean, it's really fun to think about, but it's kind of like, got to really wrap your head around. This is a really slow process of them interacting over many, many, many years to the point where they get very specific. And so this is a win-win for both the plant and this particular bee. So let me show you another video if I can. Get to it. So this one's like 3.5 minutes. And I need to do this. Oop.
This buzzing is a secret password, the key to a lock. What this bumblebee is after is pollen. Bumblebees eat pollen. It's high in protein. But the flower doesn't want to give it to just anyone, so it hides it away in those bright yellow anthers. For a flower, that's unusual. Most flowers keep their pollen on the outside of the anther, which is the male part of the flower. Pollen is basically sperm for plants. Most flowers make sugary nectar too. They use it as bait to attract bees and other pollinators, which get coated in pollen away. And since bees are messy, they inadvertently scatter some of that pollen onto the female part of the next flower they visit. That's how most flowers have sex. But this type of flower doesn't offer nectar. The only way to get to its pollen is through those tiny pores at the ends. But the bumblebee knows just what to do. It wraps its legs around the flower and bites down on the anthers, that male part of the flower. See those wings shaking? Normally, the bumblebee uses those powerful muscles to flap its wings. That's what makes the buzzing sound when they fly. But here, those muscles vibrate its whole body so hard and fast that it makes a louder, higher-pitched buzz. This vibration shakes up the pollen trapped inside the anthers until it spews out all over the bumblebee. It's called buzz pollination. You don't need a bumblebee to do it. A tuning fork will do.
Gotta be the right frequency though.
The bumblebee grooms the pollen down into sticky sacs on its legs, carries it back to the hive. Only a few types of pollinators, like bumblebees, are capable of buzz pollination. Honeybees can't do it. This field is kind of a free-for-all. Think Las Vegas buffet. Tons of food, but long lines, lots of competition. Buzz pollination is kind of like a private club. By only permitting pollinators that know the secret knock, flower ups the chances that its pollen will end up on flowers from the same club, same species. The bumblebee, well, sure, it has to work a little harder, and there's no sweet nectar, but it's a reliable pollen stash that almost no one else has access to. Tomatoes, potatoes, blueberries. All of these need buzz pollination to reproduce. Much of the food we eat owes its existence to that buzz. Our secret password here at Deep Look, I'll be honest, it's that subscribe button.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
What a fantastic adaptation. So who says plants are boring? Ah. So yeah, buzz pollination. Potatoes. I didn't know that until I learned about buzz pollination. So potatoes and tomatoes. So I posted those videos in the readings and video section if you want to rewatch those to think about it. And then there's the links too in the slides here, so you can get it a couple different ways there. Okay, I think that's working. Okay, so buzz pollination with bees. So again, in this slide, in the notes section is the link for that video we just watched, where they have to do the right frequency of buzzing. So, okay, and then another thing that I thought of over the weekend is this idea. I teach about some of these ideas in my advanced botany class that I'm offering in the fall, and this one is looking at another really specific coevolutionary adaptation process where you have the plant designing its leaves right around the flower to have such a shape that it helps a bat do echolocation and find the plant. And so some scientists noticed this and, you know, started to wonder about the shape of that leaf and like, well, that's weird. And started thinking about what kind of pollinators might be going toward those plants. And so then they did some nice controlled studies where they were looking at, okay, what's going on here? An unusual dish-shaped leaf displayed above the flower attracts bat pollinators. Its echoes fulfill the requirements for an effective beacon. That is, they were strong, multi-directional, and had a recognizable invariant echo signature. And so the bat was able to pick up the, you know, the echo bouncing back. It was able to learn that if I go toward that, I'll be able to get a reward, a treat. And so pretty amazing. So here where they have it labeled A, that's the unusual leaf design right above the flower. So right there. And then the flower, of course, is right there. And then the reward is in the nectaries. So really close coevolutionary process here where, again, the plant is like, I'll create a unique echo back to you, so you'll keep coming. And that way you'll move, you know, get pollen on you. You'll go to the next individual of my species and do that all over again, deposit the pollen, and mission accomplished. The plants get pollinated. So pretty amazing. And then caffeine in nectar. Some plants will produce small amounts of caffeine in their nectar. And, you know, there's been enough studies with humans and animals that caffeine can improve your memory. And so when they were doing nectar analysis and were surprised to find caffeine, they're like, wait, what? And so they did some actual studies. There's quite a few published now. And it seems like that's done on purpose. The flowers, the plants are doing this to get the bees and other pollinators, hey, remember me, come back, and you'll get another reward. So flowers with caffeine receive more pollination. So here it's not a visual, instead it's you know, a chemical being produced. So someone thought to look at the composition and found out. And then it's like, well, okay, is it only doing that? And another group of scientists said it's actually helping some honeybees not only remember, but it's helping them fight a pathogen. So that was a really interesting. I didn't know that. And so Serratia marcescens is a bacteria that can be pathogenic. And so they were looking at this. If they consume the caffeine, you know, the nectar that has caffeine in it, what does that do? Does that help them deal with this pathogen? And it said that not only did it not harm the normal, so bees have a gut microbiome, just like, well, not just like we do, but you know, they all have, every organism has microbes hanging out with it. It said it didn't harm, the caffeine didn't harm those good microbes, but it did help lower the issue of getting attacked by a pathogen. So interesting to think about. And then nicotine. So you know how addictive nicotine can be, I would imagine by now. And yeah, nicotine in really low concentrations in some flowers, not just, well, certainly the tobacco plant, but they're finding it in others too. This isn't as common. So again, learning, the bumblebee learning is impacted by low doses of nicotine. Profound effects on learning in a dose-dependent manner. So dose-dependent means there's two, at high doses, it's not good. So there's a sweet spot here. So nicotine was surprising. So what made me think of this is we used to, one of my undergrad students years ago, he was doing grafting experiments in the greenhouse and he was growing a tobacco plant because he wanted to graft it to a potato plant. And so the potatoes would grow underground and then the tobacco leaves up top. And he had some tobacco plants, sorry, he had some tobacco plants growing in the corner. And he's like, hey, come check this out. And we were looking at some flies that were walking around. Tobacco leaves are really big, you know, and they were walking around on the surface and they looked drunk. They were like walking around, falling over on their side. They'd get up and kind of shake and then, and I'm like, what's going on here? And he said they ate and got too much nicotine and it was like messing with their nervous system. So that was really an eye-opening visual, you know, so, you know, of why plants produce nicotine. It's not for us to get addicted. It's for them to defend themselves, right? They're trying to defend themselves. But here, it's not really defense. They're using it to entice and help a bumblebee remember better. So really interesting. And then Forrest was telling me about this frog. And so I had to put that in here. There's a tiny little frog that might be, they have to do more studies on it, but it may be the first amphibian that we know of to pollinate. It is so cute. So here we have, this is in the tropical area, right? Yeah. But
Yeah.
so there it is, going deep into the flower there. So this is apparently this frog, or where this frog lives, there's a lot of frogs, but this frog is really, really small. And in the notes section, I have, you know, this is a threatened species and maybe this out of the way. and maybe the only species of amphibian in the world that acts as a pollinator. Maybe there might be more. So if we lose this species, we lose a unique ecological interaction. So they're trying to use this knowledge as a way to say, hey, let's, keep these frogs alive. They could be very important for this ecosystem. Apparently, where this frog lives, there's a lot of frogs and people don't really, like a lot of people don't really respect the frogs. They're like, "Ah, another frog," and they don't give it much, they just don't. So they're trying to raise awareness that, hey, we need to pay attention. They could be doing very valuable things for our ecosystems. So, and in that article, they also talked about, oh, and then there's a short YouTube video if you want to watch it, where they talk about this too and explain a little bit more about it. But in that article that I was reading, they said, it looks like there's others that we hadn't really thought about that could be playing a role. Lizards, opossum, brown rats, not rates, brown rats, take out the E, and cockroaches. So this is not done by in-person viewing, but if they set up camera traps and they watch what's happening when, humans aren't around, they see presence of these animals visiting the flowers. So they're starting to think that we need to broaden our idea of who's out there pollinating compared to what we know. So something good about cockroaches in this case. That's one I have a hard time with. I'm good with spiders, all kinds of things, but cockroaches, I once,
It's unfortunate for them that their natural homes came to try to on the flowers floor.
I,
Came around and we showed up with a lot of detritus.
yeah. When I was at MSU for a year, they had infested the apartment complex on campus. And so they were all the apartments were connected one to the other. So if one had them, they're gonna disperse, So I remember sitting at my desk studying calculus, and I must have been so still. I'm not a fan of calculus, sorry, and so I was probably half asleep. And I was still enough where a cockroach running right over my textbook. I'm like,
That way,
yeah, I'm like, the nerve, it has to know I'm right here, this big, huge human, but very confident, they move so fast. And then you go into the bathroom in the middle of the night and turn on the light and they all dive down the drain and yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Silverfish don't bother you.
yeah, silverfish I can do. Yeah, I can do that. And then when I was working on campus, I had to go down in the basement to get to the attached greenhouse. And they had a bunch of giant cockroaches. And one, that they had like a mouse colony, they had cockroach colonies, and one escaped. And it was all dark, just the emergency lights were on, and I see this thing on the floor. And so like, this is the hall, it was over there on that side, and I'm like, okay, I'll go over here. And then it zigzagged to be right in front of me and came right at me. It was like, it was trying to get to me. It was a huge cockroach. It was like, I left it alone. It's like, I'll leave you alone. You're an escapee, good on ya, but stop coming at me. But anyways, so who knows? We might have some cockroaches pollinating. That's a good thing. Okay, whoops. So that slide set has been updated. Make sure that you get those. Whoops, where's the other one? So now I want to get into the next slide set. Flowers and fruits 2.
Good on both. We're all.
All right, let me reshare.
Thank you, Ben. Good.
Okay, so flowers and fruits 2. So now we have to think about, all right, let's say pollination is successful and everything went okay, and we had transfer of pollen to the stigma of the flower. The sperm united with the egg. What does the second sperm do in angiosperms? What does it fuse with? The polar nuclei. Okay, so there's a central cell with two nuclei, so it fuses with that cell. And so you have both sperm doing something important. And so, of course, the sperm that fertilizes the egg, that becomes the baby sporophyte, right? First the zygote, then the embryo, and then finally it's going to be the baby sporophyte in the seed. And then as the seed's developing, that second sperm did its job of fusing with the polar nuclei so it could make the endosperm. So now we have fruit development going on. And usually if you say fruit, what pops into your head is like an apple or an orange or a peach. And that's totally, yeah, of course. So that's one type of fruit. We call it a fleshy fruit. So right here is an example of a fleshy fruit. And you need to know the anatomy, please. So what you have on a fleshy fruit, the very surface is called the exocarp. And then the fleshy part is the mesocarp. And there's some kind of endocarp. It could be very massive, like you see here in this peach, but not always. And then the seed inside of that. So this is a fleshy fruit anatomy. Now, what they also are showing here is if you take the exo, meso, and endocarp region and slim it way down, so it's not fleshy anymore, and fuse it all together, then it's called a pericarp. And that's what we have in a dry fruit. All right, so a dry fruit is not fleshy, okay? And it's greatly like pared down in its differentiation. It has all three of these portions thinned way down and fused together. Okay? And then we say it's a pericarp for a dry fruit. So we'll get into fleshy and dry. So basically, going back to this picture, we have the idea that the sperm got to the eggs in the ovules, right? In the megagametophyte embryo sac. And now this beautiful flower has to go through a lot of differentiation. Some parts of it will die off, but other parts, of course, we have the developing seeds will need to get encased in fruit tissue. And so you can have fleshy fruit, which means that those three areas, the exo, meso, endo, is fleshy. It's definitely fleshy and juicy. Dry is the idea that those three layers have greatly reduced and fused together. And it's not fleshy, it's just dry at maturity. And then we also look, so that's if you're looking to classify fruit, first thing you do, is it fleshy or dry? And then you look, how do these fruits break open when they're mature, or do they break open when they're mature? They actually use that as a way to classify fruits. And then they ask, okay, is this fruit coming from one ovary that got everything going, or multiple? Did it come from a single flower, or did it come from an inflorescence? And then it might have other parts associated.
Dry. Every fruit that I can think of right now.
I know, right?
It's like fleshy and like.
Yep, and that's, most people out there won't believe you when you say, for example, peas in a pod, that's a dry fruit. Peas in a pod.
Vegetable,
Yeah.
vegetable fruit.
Yep.
Vegetable.
So your mom and dad told you eat your vegetables, and you can nicely tell them they've been wrong all these years. That's vegetables. So. Yeah, I know. So we have to think about this. So, oh, and then this last part, ovarian, other than ovarian tissue. So that's where often the receptacle of the flower might come into play. That's very common. Look how close the receptacle is to the ovary. So some fruits that you're eating, it's really the receptacle that you're eating mostly, the most of it. So we'll look at that a little bit too. So there, that a pea in a pod that's a fruit. It's a dry fruit. So the shell, is that what you call it? Pea pod, the pod is the pericarp. Okay, all three layers drastically reduced, fused together. And then the idea that I like this picture because they're showing how the flower, what's going on when it started to develop in the flower. And then once you get the mature fruit, what's going on here. And so fruit is coming from, a pollinated flower, right? So a lot of what your parents told you are veggies are really fruits. So here, okay, so these terms, simple, aggregate, multiple, accessory, let me get into that a little bit, and we'll come back to this. All right, so a simple. So a fruit, this right here, that's the definition of a fruit. A fruit is a mature ovary plus or minus additional flower parts. So that means anything that developed from a pollinated flower is a fruit. Tomato is a fruit. Corn is a dry fruit. So it's kind of, when you haven't thought about it this way, it's a little mind bending. So can you think of what is a true vegetable that did not come from a flower being pollinated? That we eat? Ginger. Pardon? Potato, ginger? Yeah, reading leaves, right?
Yeah.
You got it. So yeah, so
And
veggies.
Sorrel.
Yeah, I mean, we probably eat a lot more fruit than we think when you look at the formal definition, not what your mom and dad told you, so.
Carrot, yeah.
The color there,
A bee.
definition is if it's sweet, it's good.
Yeah, then it's a fruit, yeah. So if it's a fruit that's simple, that means it's just a single ovary. So cherry is an example of that. It's just one ovary that got pollinated, fertilized. If you're an aggregate fruit, that means you have a single flower, but several ovaries are in that flower. So then the way I remember that, and I will be asking for these definitions, so please spend time. So I remember aggregate is a flower. It's a single flower. So a flower with many ovaries. And then to distinguish that from, so blackberry is an example of an aggregate. And then multiple, multiple, I just remember many flowers. So if you're a multiple fruit, you came from many flowers. So that's an inflorescence, right? So a cluster of mature ovaries produced by a cluster of flowers. So try to keep for some reason, I have a hard time keeping those two straight. So I had to do that little trick of aggregate means a flower, a single flower. Multiple means many flowers, many ovaries. So pineapple. Pineapple's a good case of that. And then corn. So each kernel on the corn on the cob is a dry fruit. We'll go over that again. And then accessory fruits means you like to accessorize as you're developing that fruit. That's where you have other parts of the flower involved. All right, we'll stop there and finish this up on Wednesday. The goal is to have Friday as a review session for the final exam.
And we have an exam on Thursday.
Thursday of next
Okay.
week.
Yep.
Yeah.